was impressive, at least to me. Now, what were the drawbacks of that? Well, Mike Tyson at 58, his legs were shot. You could tell anytime he ate a punch from Jake Paul that he was kind of looking for his footing, kind of stumbling around, not because he was necessarily hurt, but because his legs and his knees and all the surgeries and the hip and everything was just, it was not functioning like a young man would in the sport of boxing, which is a young man's game. But again, Mike started out the fight like Mike Tyson, at least to a degree. He was a little bit more explosive. He was able to make some things happen, at least in flashes early in the first round. He even landed probably the biggest punch of the first round. I actually gave him a win in the first round. So yeah, I thought that was a massive deal for Mike. And it was one of those things where you started watching the fight and everybody online was talking about, let's see some magic. And does Mike still have some magic? And in that first round, I think you had basically him pulling the rabbit out of the hat, throwing the deck of cards and pulling it back into his hand and maybe tapping a wand, a top hat, and pulling a rabbit out of it. That was about all the magic Mike had. And with that being said, the rest of the fight was Jake Paul's. Although Mike showed, again, great head movement, which I was super impressed by. Again, off the center line, super lateral because he's so square with that kind of peekaboo style. I took away from this fight that Mike Tyson, no, he shouldn't have been fighting, but that for his age, he was still one of the most impressive 58-year-olds that I think I could ever see in a boxing ring. But that, yeah, he was completely shot. And again, I think it kind of went the way everyone thought, where Mike Tyson, after the first round, was going to go downhill and go downhill quickly. And I will say, sitting ringside, when that started to happen, you did get that uneasy feel in your stomach. I mean, I can't lie. That's the first thing I thought was when Mike went from flashes of brilliance to stagnant and a bit stuck, just uncharacteristic of the person in your mind that you think of. Even if you know that's not who Mike Tyson is anymore, still, predisposition of your mind to think that's who he once was doesn't allow you to let go of that past to necessarily fully acknowledge the present until it's right there in front of you. And as I watched him in rounds 2 through the rest of the fight, it did become more of a very much sad thing. If you even go back and listen to my dad and I commentate the fight, we started to talk less and less and more just, appreciate Mike's last couple of rounds in the ring, but also just feel a little bit distraught by watching him move around in a way that wasn't him. And I guess that's the easiest way to describe it. And again, I call that sad because that's what it was. And as much hype and excitement as I had for this event, it did deliver with Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, probably one of, if not the best fights I've seen in a very long time. And some of the undercard fights, Mario Barrios, Abel Ramos, a banger of a fight as well. Everybody showed up and showed out, but I don't know. That last fight just had you feeling uneasy. It was like, the idea of Jake and Mike getting in a ring sounds great, but then, when it actually happened, it was what you thought, but maybe not in the way you thought, if that makes sense. Because Jake also had talked about, on the other side of things, how he was going to knock Mike out, and that didn't happen. And again, I'm grateful for that. I think everybody that wanted to watch this fight didn't want to see Mike get hurt, and he didn't, so that's a good thing. But it also doesn't help Jake Paul, and that's the other side of this equation where, okay, it does help him in the fact that he did, as we'll look at here on Netflix Twitter account, 60 million households watching this fight. So yes, obviously because Mike Tyson's involved, but Jake does have to get some credit for that. I think they doubled the Texas Gate record. Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano had 50 million people watching them. This is the most watched fight since cable was invented. Like, all that's great. But when I say that it doesn't necessarily do much for Jake, I guess strictly mean it doesn't really do much for him in the boxing sense. Like, I didn't learn much about Jake in this fight. I didn't learn how much better he could have gotten because he didn't really show too much. In fact, the first couple of rounds, he was very wary of Mike Tyson and stayed at a range that was keeping him safe, which I thought was pretty shocking because, you do that for the first maybe round or two, and then you get in and stick it on Mike, and he didn't do that. And I know this is going to sound crazy to me, but if the whole buildup is, I'm going to knock Mike out, I'm going to knock Mike out. Again, I do appreciate some contrition. We'll get to what Jake said in the post-fight press conference, but if that's the buildup, and then you don't even attempt to do that, or you don't attempt to engage in the fight that would have created that moment for either of you, and you do just get the win, especially after the slap and everything else. I know it's a build. I know that we had this crescendo of, shit talk and the slap and the whole thing, and Jake's pulling contracts and gets to the fight, and it's a bit of a letdown. I'm sorry. I don't want to say that I wanted to see Mike get knocked out because I didn't want to see that, but I did want to see Jake try to go in and showcase whatever it was. And I know he wants to genuinely not hurt Mike because I think Jake Paul genuinely does idolize Mike Tyson, but it does leave a weird kind of feel for the fans when you do all of that, and then at the end of the rounds, like 5, 6, and 7, you can clearly see Jake taking his foot off the gas pedal. But that's only after the first couple of rounds where he avoided Mike pretty much at all costs, which again shows the respect, but also it's a boxing match. The goal is to hurt the other individual. Jake knows this.